Welcome to Dysautonomia Support Network Disability Webinar. We're going to go ahead and get this started. I'm Kim Hartman, DSN Medical and Clinical Liaison, as well as one of the advocacy team co-leaders. I'll be moderating tonight as well as screen sharing the presentation, and you'll be able to hear our speakers. I'll get to the very important introductions quickly, but first wanted to go over a few items for everyone. Zoom may be an unfamiliar platform for many of you. This event is set up so that everyone is on mute. For the best quality, please remain muted. The presenters and I will be the only ones that you can hear. If you have questions, please post them in the chat box. At the end of the presentation, we will address questions. Please limit them to 1 to 2 sentences so that we can try to address as many as possible. There is a capacity of 100 participants tonight. We know that there are a lot more interested in this that want to hear the information. So once the webinar is done, we're going to go ahead and share the link for the recording out on social media, and we want you guys to share that out as well. And within a couple of days, it will be up on our website, dysautonomiasupport.org. I will be making up a Q&A document that also will be posted. There are some questions that I have collected prior to the webinar, and they will be included in that as well. Now on to the main event. Dysautonomia Support Network would like to thank our guest speakers, Jonathan Rodis and Kathleen Kane, for joining us this evening. We are thrilled to have the opportunity to share this information with our entire community. I know that we are all looking forward to some information about this often frustrating process of applying for disability. Jonathan Rodis, MBA, is a national disability and medical advocate for rare disorders. Among many other affiliations, he is also a board member for DSN. Kathleen Kane is a disability lawyer who has experience with cases involving rare and complex conditions. I've kept you waiting long enough. Jonathan and Kathleen, feel free to take it away. I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing now.
Thank you.
Okay.
By the way, that was Kathleen. This is John.
Okay, so whenever you guys are ready, just tell me next and I'll click for you.
You can go to the next.
Okay.
So I actually had a screen prior to this that for some reason has been left out of the PowerPoint presentation. But the first, it's okay, I know it. The first thing we should talk about is the difference in the 2 types of programs that Social Security has available. One is referred to as Ssdi, and that is the type of program that is available for those that have put into the system, meaning they have worked and they have put into Social Security over the years. It's kind of like the same pool of money that is available for retirement Social Security. Okay. There's also something called supplemental security income, and that's for people that have not worked necessarily, have not worked long enough, have not put into the system, and it's also for children. In both of those categories, the definition of disability and whether or not one is deemed disabled is basically the same, but it depends on some financial considerations. So with Ssdi, when you put into the system, it doesn't matter if you have income or assets, you're still eligible for that program. But with supplemental security income, or SSI, you have to be low income and no assets, basically less than $2,000 in assets. But again, the definition of whether or not you're disabled would be the same. So at first, you have to make the decision to file, and that's, and this is basically a big consideration for those who have worked and who have put into the system, who have a career, who are basically maybe going from a situation where they have an income to they don't have an income. Because of course, if you're applying for Social Security, you're probably not working. You can't make more than $1,000 a month and be deemed disabled. So obviously the financial considerations are pretty staggering. my husband, Jonathan, went through this process years ago, so I'd like to kind of have him speak to what it meant for him.
Yeah, that first part of the slide, health considerations is a tough one, because a lot of times, just like I did, you want to fight through your illness. You want to continue on. You don't want to give up your career, your job. Nobody really wants that. But I had to, because I realized that I was literally killing myself working. So the major concern, of course, is being health, like I'm stating. But then, of course, you've got financial considerations. If I file for disability, personally, when I did, I was very nervous about the financial considerations and what it would mean to me to file. And there's a lot of burden in that. But honestly, the most important thing is your health. And I just want to tell anyone out there that was like me, that was sort of in denial and thought they could just continue on, that actually it's very dangerous to do that, because you're going to degenerate even further by the more and more stress you put on yourself. Emotional considerations, boy, is that a tough one, because you're already having struggles being sick, but piled on top of that of being sick is dealing with the whole factor of filing. Because like I said, nobody wants to file for disability. Nobody wants to not be able to work, or for young people who want to have a career, and nobody wants to not be able to get that career. It's a tough one, but that's where it's important to talk to others that are going through what you're going through, or have gone through what you're going through. And that's one of the reasons why I'm an advocate for so many, because I want to make sure people to feel like they're not alone.
Yeah, and John has Marfan Syndrome, which is a rare disorder, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So he is obviously familiar with the struggle of going through a situation where you have a rare disorder, no one knows really much about it. Maybe your doctors don't even understand. So, he can certainly speak to this. You can, next.
Maybe.
That's okay.
There we go.
Okay. So if you've made the decision to file, you can actually do it one of two ways. You can do it online now, or you can do it in person by going into the Social Security office. If you're going to do it online, you go to ssa.gov. There's a link to applying for disability. You should, when you start the process of applying online, should have all of your medical information. So all of your doctors, all of your hospitalizations, all of your medications. And again, doctors include physical therapy. If you have any psychological disorders, counselors, psychiatrists, everything. You're also going to need to have, if you have worked, last 15 years of work experience. And they're going to want to know things like, what the position was, what did you do, how long you were there, and what you did in that position. Did you have to lift? Did you have to stand? Did you have to walk? All of those questions are going to be answered or going to be demanded in the online application. If you want to do it in person, you can go to the website. There's a toll-free number. You can call and you can make an appointment at your local office to actually apply in person. And I think John can speak to how he applied and what his experience was.
Yeah, I'll try to make this a short one, because I know a lot of people have heard me say this at other talks and at conferences. But for me, as I said, it was so difficult to file and to make that decision. One night I was up thinking, do my doctors really understand my limitations? And I said, no, they really don't. So I sat down and wrote out a list of my limitations, of how I'm affected and my quality of life. And that was very helpful, because when I went to saw the doctors, the next appointments, they were shaken by what I was telling them. They didn't realize the depth of my limitations. And that's why it's important for all of you to make sure your doctors truly understand your quality of life, and also the different conditions that you have, and what those conditions truly are and how limiting they are. I can't stress that enough, how important it is. For me, I had everything all basically wrapped up in a ball, getting ready to go, and I figured I'm a social person. So I would go in person to see the Social Security, and that sounds great. But when I went in and waited, and as you guys all know now, I went through quite a lot of decision making and the torture of dealing with being unable to work and the day-to-day struggle. And as soon as she let me into the representative's office, the first thing out of his mouth was, "You're disabled?" And frankly, I felt my fingers clenching into a fist, and I was about to punch him and knock him over the desk, but I knew that would not get me approved. So I took a deep breath, and my mind, which still does, thank God, works very quickly. And I asked him, let me explain just part of my disability to you. And I said, think about the last time you had a bad cold and the achiness and the weakness and how you felt just basically all over your body. I said, and get dizziness. I said, I feel like that 2 to 3 days a week. So I gave him a chance to think about that, which he did. And then I said, now think about the last time you had a bad flu and you had hardly energy in your body. Getting out of bed was almost impossible. To go to the bathroom, never mind walk. And you hurt from head to toe, and you were just a mess. I said, I feel like that 4 to 5 days a week. So he was totally beat red like an apple. But from then on, he actually thanked me at the end of the appointment and said, you've shown me what invisible disability is. So that's my story. You can go next.
Yeah, one of the things.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
One of the things you want to keep in mind with applying is that you want to include everything in terms of what your conditions are. So for instance, we know many people, of course, that have EDS and have, all the comorbid conditions, including dysautonomia. So it's important to list everything, including any kind of mental conditions that you have. And my experience has been that those with chronic medical issues sometimes also suffer from depression and other mental limitations. So those should also be included.
I'm glad you brought that up, Kathleen, before we go to the next slide. She's absolutely right, because with dysautonomia, it affects the whole body. And you've got to have that in your medical records, not only the diagnosis, but your doctors have to understand how disabling it is and how it intermixes with the other conditions that you have, so that the doctor's understanding and the doctor's support is extremely paramount to you getting approved, and also increasing your care going forward with that doctor.
Next.
Okay.
Thanks.
So as we spoke of, John went through this process, and afterwards, when he decided that we should try to help people, we came up with this list of things that you can do in the beginning to increase your chances of getting approved. We'll go through the actual process in a little bit, but it can be a very, very lengthy process. Many people are denied the first time, the second time, and sometimes beyond that. So anything you can do to improve your case from the beginning, is very, very important. And just to reiterate what John just said, the most important thing in terms of going into this process is that you have the support of your doctor. And because if you don't, it's going to be an uphill battle completely. You should have a discussion as to what you're going to do and if they're going to support you, basically. And if they're not, then, it might be time to find another doctor. But let me say about that a lot of times people say to me, well, my doctor said to me that he doesn't know enough to say whether I'm disabled. He doesn't know what that means. And that's absolutely correct. And the Social Security Administration, if your doctor says you are disabled, Social Security Administration doesn't care. As far as they're concerned, they're the one to make that determination. What a doctor can do, though, is state what your limitations are. And, the Social Security Administration will then determine whether those limitations make you disabled. So just going a little bit through this list, maybe you could speak to filling out the forms.
Sure. Yeah, in fact, Deb, you want me to go? I'm going to go through all the elements and do short. Okay, first item is filling out SSI and SSDI forms. No matter which form you're filling out, it's really important to specify, answer the question, of course. And then when you get a chance, or you have the opportunity in the question for the answer, put in the fact what you're limited, how it limits you, or what your limitations are. Some reason Social Security, the SSA, likes that word limited or limitations. And it's true. You are limited. You have limitations. So make sure you state that so they understand. State funding programs, that's on there because every state is different. It's like its own country. So it's important to know what state funding there is, what state programs there are, any kind of assistance within the state, which leads to the third item, which is a letter of support. And Kathleen, you could probably address that.
There's certain organizations, for instance, Marfan Foundation will give a letter of support after you've been denied the first time, basically explaining a little bit about the condition. We're trying to get other of, the national organizations to do something like that. This isn't something that means you're automatically going to get approved, but, it just goes, especially with a rare disorder, to kind of confirm, what the issues are.
And coming from a national organization, it gives it more weight. The Social Security judge is far less apt to be able to criticize a national organization, such as this Dysautonomia Support Network. Now, the doctor support letters.
Yeah, in terms of doctor support letters, I'll kind of put that with doctor's evaluations. The doctors don't necessarily, again, have to put in a letter that they believe that you're disabled, because that's really not going to mean much. What I do with my clients is I use a doctor evaluation form, okay, and that goes through the different limitations that you have in terms of not only sitting and standing and physical limitations, but also in terms of your ability to work all day, to concentrate, to focus, to not miss time from work. And they're the things that are going to be important in the evaluation as to whether or not you're disabled. With rare conditions, I also suggest submitting some research up front, some medical articles, which, with the internet obviously are readily available. So many people, or basically a person in the Social Security Administration, is not going to know about a rare disorder 9 times out of 10. So if you can submit something in terms of some medical articles about it, that can be helpful.
And then spelling out the limitation that you have to have that limitation. So you don't want to be submitting articles or research about something that you don't have or you're not affected with, excessively. And Kathleen already discussed the doctor's evaluation.
In terms of medical records, when you apply for Social Security, the initial application, Social Security will order all of your medical records. Okay, that's why they're asking for all that information up front. However, if it was me, I would probably have my own copies of my medical records to submit to the Social Security Administration. And that is because you'd be surprised what doctors put in your medical records. And sometimes it can be something that is not positive for your case, especially with a rare disorder, one that's not recognized. It could put, the doctor can be putting in his records that he has doubt as to your diagnosis. I've seen that a number of times, so it might be worth getting your medical records.
And you have the right to contest it if it's not true with the hospital, and the records can be changed. Approved cases in your state. What I mean by that is that if there's anyone in your support groups that has been approved for disability within the condition that you have, it'd be good for you to talk to them and see, and we'll get to the legal stages, but it's nice to be able to talk to someone that's been through this, that maybe knows a lawyer that has handled the case, but we do tell people you do not need to hire a lawyer up front. You could get the lawyer at the reconsideration stage, which is basically the hearing stage. The daily journal is something my wife asked me to do, which I thought she was asking me to do like a diary, which I laughed at her. I'm like, are you kidding me? But a daily journal is good to keep. What it is, you don't have to write paragraph upon paragraph. You can do it in bulleted form. And things like I wrote down is that, let's say, I couldn't take a shower today because I had hardly any energy to do it, and I was afraid I might fall. Okay. Or I'm walking down the hallway today and I walked into the wall. Okay. Or I got up and then I fell down because I was dizzy. These are things that are important to state, because the judge, if the judge is going to read it, which some are, then they can read and go, wow, this is not exactly a very healthy person in front of me. The other thing is, a lot of us, when we go in front of a judge, we don't look sick. We don't look disabled, like I explained earlier. So it's important for us to make sure that if you do have assistive devices that you use, you should bring them with you. If you do wear ring splints or have bracing or anything like that, you should be wearing them. Sadly, most of the society, has to see something. But, we all know that it doesn't have to be visible to be disabled. You can,
Next.
Thank you, Kim.
Yep.
So early approval is possible, however, not likely. Social Security has what they call a listing of impairments, and they're basically regulations of conditions, diseases, disorders that if you fit their definition, then you're automatically going to be approved. And again, that would probably happen early on. Dysautonomia, EDS, they are not in the listing of impairments, okay? So sometimes you can find something in the listing of impairments, although it's not defined as those specific diagnoses that may fit your particular case. But I find that most people are not going to fit specifically in the listing of impairments. Next. So if you do not fit into the listing of impairments, then the Social Security Administration and the judges are told to evaluate your residual functional capacity. And that basically is taking everything into consideration physically and mentally. What are you able to do, okay, in terms of a job or in terms of employment? So this is kind of like the catch-all, but this is where they're able to evaluate everything that goes on with you and say, if this person has all of these limitations, physical and mental, are they going to be able to do a job? And remember, with Social Security, it's not just the job that you used to do, it's any job in the economy. So it's, it's quite broad. With that being said, their definition of working is 40 hours a week, okay? Basically 15-minute break in the morning, half hour for lunch, 15-minute break in the afternoon. Besides that, you should be what they refer to as on task, focused and concentrating on whatever you're doing. And if you're not, you're basically not employable, right? So if you have to take, for whatever reason, numerous breaks throughout the day, then you're probably not going to be employable. And this is kind of common sense. If you're not functioning because you're dizzy, because you're on pain medication, you're not concentrating, focusing, you're going to be limited in your ability to do a job and to be employable. If you miss more than 3 days a month, okay, then you're probably, well, you're not employable. You're just not going to be able to sustain a job. So all of those things are important. Next. So basically, we talked about your initial filing. If you're lucky, you're going to get an answer for your initial filing within the first 3 or 4 months. Sometimes it takes longer. Then you go into what we call the reconsideration phase.
I was going to say, before she gets in the reconsideration stage, when you do file your application initially, that's, like Kathleen said, 3 to 4 months, or maybe even earlier, you're going to get a letter, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a denial. Please don't. I know it's upsetting because she told me when I filed that I not to get upset, but I did, because it's a stupid letter and it kind of insults you about, oh, we don't, looking at what you sent us, we still think you can work. Ignore it, appeal it. Okay, go ahead.
Correct. And by the way, you have 60 days to appeal, and some people just get so upset that they forget about it or they don't appeal it. This whole process is about fighting. You have to keep fighting. So don't get discouraged if you're denied it originally. The reconsideration phase is basically just someone else in the Social Security Administration looking at your file and seeing if the first decision was correct. And 9 times out of 10, they say that it was correct. That process probably takes another 3 or 4 months. If you are denied at reconsideration, you have to appeal again within 60 days and ask for a hearing in front of an administrative law judge. Okay. This is probably the most important part of the process, and we'll talk more specifically about that. But at the minimum, you're looking at a year before you get a hearing. So far, we're at a year and a half, and that's kind of at the very minimum. It depends on where you are in the country. You know, some places are longer than others, but this is a lengthy process, and you know, you need to be prepared for that. Hopefully you're successful at the hearing. If not, there's an appeals counsel. That doesn't mean another hearing, it's just another, it's basically a higher level, you know, someone beyond the judges, looking at the judge's decision. And with all appeals, again, it's hard to be successful at that level. But it does happen, and sometimes the appeals counsel will remand the case for a new hearing or to totally overturn the judge's decision. If the appeals counsel denies, then you can go to the United States District Court, you can go to the appeals court, Court of Appeals, United States Court of Appeals, and you can go to the Supreme Court. Obviously, that's not going to happen, you know, unless you have a really significant legal issue. So your best chance is at the hearing, and you know, then maybe at the appeals counsel.
That's why we want to build such a strong case view. That's the work I do, is to get everything. When I filed, I just inundated them with information. So they probably got sick of me, and I was very lucky to get approved in 5 months from the time I initially applied. But that's an exception. Of course, that was in 2001, many, many years ago. Next.
So as I said, the administrative hearing is probably the best chance that you have for an approval. So you really, really have to be proactive about preparing for the hearing. This is probably the place, well, I won't say probably, I believe it is the place that you need a lawyer, okay? Although it is pretty informal, you know, it's still a hearing in front of a judge under oath, taking evidence, and there could be experts there. So this is, you know, this is serious. Preparation is key. Hopefully, you know, you have a good relationship with your lawyer, and you can, you know, you've been preparing for the last year, and then obviously beforehand, you really have to prepare as to what's going to be presented. You can have witnesses. They're not always necessary. Sometimes, you know, they can be helpful though. Once in a while, they'll have a medical expert at a hearing. I am never concerned when they have a medical expert, because their medical experts are usually your basic primary care physician. So if it's a rare disorder, they're not going to know very much about it. You, as a patient, I'm sure, probably know more, and hopefully your lawyer has educated him or herself so that they know more than the medical expert about your condition.
Kathleen loves it when they have a medical expert, so-called medical expert there, because of her knowledge of connective tissue disorders. Yeah, go on.
They will probably have a vocational expert who will basically, after all the testimony is in, the judge will ask, you know, based on the limitations, are there jobs that this person could do? And your lawyer will be able to cross-examine the vocational expert, which again is probably another good reason for a lawyer.
And real quickly, as far as, it's not really a witness, but it's important. If you have a doctor that's supportive of you, that's willing to come and to the hearing, that would be awesome. Because having a doctor there that cares for you would be very difficult for a judge to say, oh, this is not credible. Next.
Well,
oh, sorry.
Just a couple other things. The administrative hearing is pretty informal though. It's going to be in a small room. It's not a courtroom like you see on TV. And it's going to be you, your lawyer, probably a vocational expert, the judge, and the judge's clerk. So it's not at all intimidating, but, you know, again, it is a hearing in front of a judge, and it is under oath. So it's something to be taken very seriously. The judge usually starts out by asking questions. Again, everything around what your limitations are, what you can or can't do, what you do right now in your life on a daily basis. Again, all trying to get the issue of what are your limitations, and are these limitations preventing you from working full time?
Next.
Next. In terms of hiring a lawyer, it is one of the regulations in Social Security that a lawyer can only charge by, if they are successful, first of all, or if you are successful, and they can only charge 25% of your retroactive payments. And what I mean by that is, we already talked about at minimum this, can be a year and a half, 2 years, sometimes longer, that you're waiting from the time that you stop working. If you are eventually successful, you're going to go back and get all of those retroactive payments from the time you were deemed disabled. Okay, and then again, the lawyer would charge 25% of that. They can't charge any other way, so that's important to know if you talk with a lawyer.
One quick question, one quick statement is, a few people have asked me is that what happens to the lawyer when you're signing up for the lawyer and they have a different form saying something like, or in the form saying, oh, well, we have fees that we're going to charge you, paperwork, anything like that.
They can charge for expenses, which is usually, ordering medical records, that type of thing, which usually isn't a lot, but they can't charge in any other capacity or else the judge isn't going to approve it. So. And
the other thing nice is that if you have a good advocate, okay, I'm of course a national advocate and I do not charge for my services, but if I get someone approved, then of course there's no attorney involved, so all the money goes to you. As I said, you should really hire a lawyer at the reconsideration stage, and then the clock starts ticking at that point. You could switch it, Kim. Next. Oh wow. Trying to think before we get to the questions if there's anything else I could. Well, we did a pretty good time. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I could say. Oh yes, very important part. Doing the application, okay, and anything going on beyond the application. Be very careful when you talk about things that you do. I've seen many judges utilize, well, you went to a concert, or you went to visit your family for a week, or you did, and of course, anyone rational or logical would realize that doesn't mean you can work 40 hours a week, okay? But what some judges do is they try to find, okay, if they can do this and they can do that and they can do this and they can do that, then I don't understand why they can work, almost implying that you're lazy. But I know you're all not. So that's why it's important to be careful what you state and in your application, in your paperwork, and also let your doctors understand the limitations that you have and how you feel, your energy, things that they may totally not be aware of that you may have thought you stated, but make sure they understand and get it into their records.
Yeah, and during your testimony and during, even conversations with your doctor, you want to make things as concrete as possible. Like the example that John gave of when he initially applied and explained what it was like to have a cold and a flu, that was something very concrete that person could understand. So as much as you can do that when you're trying to explain to people how you feel and what your limitations are, the more effective. So the other thing I would just want to say is, this process is not an easy one. It's gotten so much tougher over the past, 5-10 years. Just as an example, maybe 5-7 years ago, when you went to an administrative law judge, 70% of people were approved. Now it's down to below 50%. And there's certain judges that have below 20%. All right, and it's not to discourage anyone at all.
No.
It's just to emphasize how important this is and that you need to put all your effort into making this as successful as possible. I mean, so many people think, well, it's obvious how sick I am. It's obvious I can't work. I mean, everybody should know this, but especially with a rare disorder, that's not necessarily the case in this process.
That's why just stating that I have dysautonomia or I have Ehlers-Danlos or Marfan, that's not enough. They have to talk about the limitations of what you have and how it affects you and the inability that you cannot work 40 hours a week on a continued basis for a year or more. I think we're all ready for the questions.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And, okay. So.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, guys. I actually had a question that I posted in here. Have you ever seen anybody get penalized for applying online? I just actually had a denial, and one of the things that the judge put in her decision was, or actually at the hearing, she asked if I could type because she said that typing was a skill. So it basically penalized me for applying online.
So a couple of things.
Anyone has had experience with that or not?
Yeah, I've never had personally that experience, but a couple of things. What will happen is, at the kind of like the default job that the judge will rely upon is, well, you can do a sedentary job, so you can sit and, you know, at a desk. The majority of sedentary jobs involve typing, okay? So what he or she, the judge, was trying to get at is, oh, you can type, so you can probably sit at a desk and type all day. Additionally, with that being said, you know, judges, if they don't want to approve you, will find whatever they can in the record to not approve you. I mean, I can tell you a million stories, but I, you know, have one where I had a client who had EDS, and she testified that she went to Hawaii, which is where she is from, in order to help her father move. And of course, you know, when she testified to that, I followed up and I said, well, what do you mean you went and helped him move? Well, I put a couple postings online on Craigslist because he was selling things. And basically I was just there for, you know, for mental support because he was leaving his, you know, family home. And of course the judge puts in the opinion that she went to Hawaii to help her father move. You know, it's like,
right. So they make what they want of it. But the most important thing here is, how long are you typing on the computer? Let's say you do 2 hours a week. That's not 40 hours a week. If you add that to a couple of the other things, it's not 40 hours a week. If you go visiting a relative, you're not working at something. Most of the times, I'm sure all of you can relate to this, that you're mostly sitting on your butt or laying down or just trying to get some, you know, relaxation and just enjoying where you are. So it's a matter of just proving what you do and how long you do it. Make sure it's listed.
Thank you. Let's see here. This is from Amanda. How can we advocate to get dysautonomia included into the list of impairments?
Well, I actually helped the Marfan Foundation get Marfan Syndrome listed in the listing of impairments. In order to do that as an organization, we would have to basically approach our federal legislators and Social Security, and basically, you know, we'd have to have a lot of testimonials, documentation, and research to show the severity of any, because dysautonomia, there's a ton of different, as we all know, a ton of different types of that fall under the dysautonomia umbrella, including POTS. So it's a matter of putting all of this together and then physically going down and testifying, and that's how we did it with getting Marfan's listed in the cardiovascular section of the listing of impairments.
I'm just reading through here. What about places like disability insurance companies who provide the lawyers and pay the firm, but then they come back and out of your award, they reimburse the insurance company out of award?
So I think what you're talking about is you had a long-term disability policy through work, and most of those policies will have a clause.
That's what I'm thinking too.
Yeah, that says that, first of all, you have to apply for Social Security disability. They will provide a lawyer, but then they will get reimbursed, and there will be, you know, some sort of offset. That's perfectly legal. I mean, I guess the way to think of it is, you know, many people don't have the long-term disability policy to begin with, which sometimes is sort of, can go in quicker and can be sort of good to have before you're approved for.
Because they want to get you off their policy and onto Social Security.
Yeah.
Here's one. I've been told that anytime you say yes, you can do something, always follow it with but, and list everything that makes it difficult for you or how you are limited in doing it. If you have an attorney and don't feel he or she is doing enough for you, can you switch attorneys without penalty?
You can definitely switch attorneys without penalty to you. It becomes sort of a thing between the two attorneys as to if you're successful, who's going to get paid what, but that's not your problem. In terms of your first statement, yeah, that was excellent. Yeah, absolutely. If you say something that you can do and there's a but, make sure you have that but.
Absolutely.
Talk about your friend.
Yeah, I ran into someone I was helping that had actually come to me after they had lost the hearing, and I helped them actually the second time go around get approved, was that they had told the judge that they got up, fed the kids breakfast, made the kids breakfast, fed them, and brought them to school. And he didn't say anything else after that. And I said, well, what happened when you got home? And he goes, oh, I had to lay down the whole day just to get enough energy to go and pick them up in the afternoon. And I said, well, that's what you should have told the judge. So absolutely, you need to let them know, not just the judge, but all through the process, how you're affected and how hard it is to take a shower, or those things that I mentioned earlier are really, really important to stress, not only your paperwork, but with your doctors.
Yeah, I mean, we're taught many of us to be strong, to tough it out, to, make it seem like we can do whatever needs to be done. This is not the time to do that.
No.
You have to be able to explain what your limitations are.
And the other aspect is a lot of conditions, and I see this a lot, young people, they look just fine. And that's where you have to really get into the limitations, improving the limitations, because otherwise they just look at a young, like a young, pretty woman. And I say that because there's a lot of the EDS women that I work with, and and they just think, oh, what's her problem? Maybe she's just lazy, or it's all in her head, which we know is, BS.
Let's see here. When should someone apply for disability?
Again, that's a decision that you sort of, have to evaluate. You can't be working and apply, and you can't be making more than $1,000 and apply. But some people, what they'll do is they won't apply. They'll keep thinking that they will go back to work. They can do this. And before you know it, years have passed. And then what happens is, in terms of Ssdi, your insured status is kind of extinguishing. So, you might get to the point where you're no longer insured if you wait too long to apply. So you have to balance those things.
The other thing I want to say is that, because I've been asked this question, I know sometimes Social Security says that you cannot be working, but isn't there an instance, Kathleen, if someone has to work because they have to pay bills and it's only 10 hours a week and they're making
it's a hard and fast rule if you're making, and I'm saying 1,000, it changes all the time based on different, what the economy is like, but in general, you can't make over $1,000 a month.
And if you do file for disability and you get approved, and down the road you feel like you can try to go back to work, and then the government, if you fail and they go back, it's going to be a lot easier to get approved because the government looks favorably on someone who attempted.
Yeah.
And that would be on the Ticket to Work program, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't know if you touched on the Ticket to Work program during the presentation.
No.
Yeah, so basically, as John said, it allows you to go back to work, to try to go back to work, and continues your benefits. And then even after that, there's a period of time that you won't receive benefits, but if you can't work, you're kind of automatically put back on. So, it is a good program if you think it's something that you're able to do.
Okay. Here's one. I volunteer online and use many of my skills from my past career. I think they would say I can telecommute, but my accommodations might not be reasonable, and just going into the office would be difficult. How would that be handled?
Being able to work online is not considered a a job in the national economy. I mean, that's something that is a huge accommodation for companies. So if that's all that you can do, you're technically not employable.
And you're also
Okay.
not doing it for 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
Right. That's great to know. Let's see. Ooh, let's put in. When should someone consider filing for their child who has a connective tissue disorder and is struggling to get through school?
So for a child, they would be eligible under supplemental security income. The problem with that is under 18, they're going to look at the household income to determine whether or not the child is eligible. So if usually, obviously, if both parents work, you're probably not going to be eligible. And sometimes even if one parent works, you wouldn't be eligible. Once the child turns 18, their household income is considered what they make, not what their parents make. So,
Right.
you know, then it becomes a different scenario.
Okay. I think we just touched on this, but what status do you lose if you wait too long?
Yeah, unfortunately, I see so many people do that because of the right reasons, because they think that they will be able to go to work, but the longer you're not working, you're losing your insured status. You basically have had to work the last 5 out of 10 years to kind of maintain that insured status. So, you know, it's something to, you know, to look upon, and it's a formula that only Social Security has because it's based on, you know, your specific income, how much and how long. So they would be able to tell, they're the only ones that would be able to tell you that, but it's just, you know, something to consider. The longer you wait, the more trouble you might be in.
Okay. I was medically retired from my job and I get a pension of $1,040 a month. Does that mean I cannot get disability?
Now, when I say income, it's earned income, and that means from working. So as long as you're applying for Ssdi and there's not any kind of income limitations, then you can have all the money you want in the bank, and you can have all the income from stocks or whatever. When I say 1,000, I mean actually out there working, earning that.
Okay. Can you just review Medicare coverage, when it kicks in and how much it costs for those approved?
Yeah. Oh, I'll make that.
Okay.
Yeah, Medicare coverage, I like in my circumstances. If when they go back to the date you were deemed disabled,
Deemed disabled.
and it's 2 years from that point is when you get your insurance. So I had to wait, even though I got approved in 5 months, I had to wait 1 year and 7 months before I could get my insurance, which stunk because I had to pay COBRA, which is not cheap.
Yeah, and so that would be for Ssdi, okay? And how much it costs, it changes all the time, but
right.
It usually will come out of your Social Security check, and I think it's like a couple hundred. But the thing to remember with this, when you have Medicare, you're going to need some sort of supplemental policy, because Medicare only covers, for instance, if you're hospitalized, it only covers 80% of the costs. So you need to either have a supplemental policy, which you would have to pay for, or if you're low income, you could have your state's Medicaid. All right. So for instance, because of my income, John could not have our state Medicaid, so he has to pay for a supplemental policy to Medicare out of pocket. Luckily, they're not that expensive.
Okay.
And places like AARP, you know, they have this type of supplemental policies.
Let's see here. Does the child have to pay back anything if they can work later?
No, as long as they, you know, are deemed disabled as a child, that they wouldn't have to pay it back as an adult. No.
Okay. And can you also explain the additional benefit for those with minors in the home?
I'm not sure what that's referring to.
I think, I'm thinking that's just Social Security. That's not disability. I was thinking like,
yeah.
The additional SSDI benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If you have minor children and you're approved for SSDI, your children will also get payments until they're 18. Okay. And the exact formula, I couldn't tell you because it's
Social Security could definitely tell you. Yeah, you just go on and either speak to someone or go online.
Okay. You have to pay it back if you're an adult. No, there shouldn't be anything.
No.
The one thing I want to tell you real fast before I forget, because I'll get brain fog and forget, is the fact that more and more, like Kathleen said, things are getting tougher on Social Security. But for those of you who are disabled and you get a letter stating, we don't think you're disabled anymore, and a lot of people have been getting those letters, the way you fight that and get back on is you have the doctor write a letter that you've degenerated, show your medical history since the time you were approved, and that should basically turn the tide on that.
How often does the average person get reviewed? And what is that process like?
There's actually no average.
Right. Yeah.
The younger you are, the more often you'll be reviewed. Okay. The older you are, the least frequently, for obvious reasons. Again, if you're older, like John's so old right now that they just send him a letter.
Thanks, hon.
Are you better or worse? And he says he's worse, and that's it.
Right.
I had a client that is 33 that was probably, I successfully got him benefits when he was like 29, and he just had to go through the review process, and it was a little more lengthy. We actually had to have a hearing. So again, the younger you are, the more sort of difficult, but as long as, again, your doctor's behind you, then you're going to be okay.
Right.
Oh, and when I say that, that means also that you're seeing your doctor, okay, that you're continuing treatment.
Right.
Because if you're not seeing your doctor and there's no medical documentation, then you're going to have a problem.
All right. I'm just looking at the time here. So we're going to have one last question, and then that will finish it up because we'll be right about at the hour mark. If you are receiving SSDI, what happens when you turn 65?
So basically, it's not 65 anymore. It's full retirement age, which based on when you were born is between 66 and 67. Then it basically goes to your retirement benefit, okay? My experience has been there's usually not that much difference between what your Social Security benefit was and your full retirement benefit is.
Okay. All right. I think that will wrap it up. Thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you, Jonathan and Kathleen. We really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and get this shared out to everybody as soon as we can. And maybe we'll have you back in the future. And we also will be doing a Twitter chat on Tuesday next week with Jonathan for sure, and potentially Kathleen. So be looking for the ads on that. So have a good evening, everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.